Some of my Japanese students think um, that I live in an English-speaking country. Well, the Philippines is an English-speaking country, but Filipinos are not native English speakers. But what I meant was that I never lived in country where native English speakers live, like the USA, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and South Africa. So I don't live in those countries. Um, so some of my students think they think that maybe I studied in an English-speaking country like the US or the UK or Australia, but I lived in the Philippines all my life. I've never been to any country because I never found a reason to go to another country. You know, Malaysia and Indonesia, China, Japan, Korea, Thailand, Taiwan, Vietnam, and other Southeast Asian countries are very near the Philippines. And I can save money and go there, but I never did because I never found a good reason to go to those countries. So I never studied in any foreign country. I have lived in the Philippines all my life. All right. So some of my students think that that I speak English at home, and maybe that's the reason why I learned English. But no, I don't. I don't speak English at home. So when I talk to my friends, my family, and basically to almost all Filipinos, I speak Philippine languages. So I can speak 3 Philippine languages. And I use those 3 Philippine. I use one of them whenever I speak to a Filipino who has been raised in the Philippines. There are Filipinos in other countries, and there are some of them who there are some Filipinos who grew up in other countries. But I don't. Maybe I got acquainted to a few of those Filipinos, but I don't have a Filipino friend who grew up in other countries. So I never lived in a foreign country. I didn't study in any foreign country, and I don't speak English at home. Well, English is taught in Philippine schools, but the only time that Philippine students speak English is when they're required to speak English in a certain subject. Well, of course, there are Filipinos who speak English to when they're speaking with their fellow Filipinos, but I'm not one of them. I don't do that, and I don't speak English with my Filipino friends because it's awkward. The culture shapes the language, so it would be really awkward if I would speak English when I'm talking to Filipinos. What else? What other? Uh, I think those are the basic wrong assumptions that my Japanese students have about me. They wonder how I learned English, and maybe they think that I learned English in a certain way, but I didn't learn English that way. So how did I learn English? How did I learn how to speak English? So some of the things I know about English are things that I learned from schools, from Philippine schools. English is taught in primary school, high school, and college. But there are other subjects. There are other things that are taught. English is just one of them. Subjects like math, science, Filipino history or social studies, biology, botany, and other kinds of studies, other subjects. So some of the things that I know about the English language are things that I learned from school. I would say more than half of the things that I know about English are things that I learned on my own. Actually, when I was in primary school, especially during my late years of primary school, English became a boring subject. The subject that I loved when I was in primary school and high school was math. I was one of the best. I was one of the best when I was in primary school, high school, and even college. Well, there were times that I was exempted from taking examinations or quizzes because the teacher, my math teachers knew that I would perhaps that I would get a very high score, or they thought that it would be useless for me to take examinations or quizzes in mathematics. Mathematics was really my favorite subject. English was boring to me because especially when an English class is about grammar. I did enjoy spelling. Spelling quizzes was somewhat fun to me. It was somewhat fun to me because I could challenge myself. When it comes to grammar, grammar classes were really boring to me because I thought that the way they taught grammar was inefficient. I think I cannot judge their teaching skills or the teaching methods because I don't have a long experience of teaching English in Philippine classrooms, so I cannot really judge them. But I had my ways of learning or studying English grammar, and the way that English grammar was taught in Philippine schools back then was something that I frowned upon. I thought it was inefficient. I think it's the way that grammar is taught in Philippine school hasn't changed, I think. So I would still say it's inefficient. And there were other activities like speaking, writing. There was of course literature. When you study English and you study literature, it was one of the things that I really enjoyed, the literature part, because I like stories. I love reading stories. And actually, um, uh, one of the things that I really loved doing when I was in high school was reading something about world history. I was fascinated by how the Roman Empire rose, and I was also fascinated at how the Roman Empire fell. I mean, I would think, how did the Roman Empire become powerful? So I was very interested in that, and the more that I discovered things about the Roman Empire, the more that I became interested, because I was introduced to very interesting people or leaders that contributed to the rich history of the Roman Empire. So that was one thing that I loved doing. Classroom discussions were really boring to me, except literature. When we discussed literature, I was really into it. And when I was in high school, another thing that bored me was that most of the academically inclined students were just studying because they want high grades. But as for me, I wanted knowledge. I didn't care whether my grades were high or low. I really didn't care. So, I did do my assignments, but I didn't try to make a great assignment. As long as I completed my assignment, I would try to complete my assignments fast, and then after completing my assignments, I would start reading books about world history, because I was really interested in world history. So as long as I completed my assignments, I didn't care whether I would get a high grade or a low grade, as long as I finished my assignment. Because back then, if you do your assignment, even if you didn't do well, the teacher would be happy. Because there were some students who wouldn't do their assignments. So if you made your assignment, then the teacher would be happy, because the teacher would think that you exerted some effort to improve yourself academically. But as for me, I didn't care whether my grades were high or low. But many of my classmates wanted high grades. They read books. They did their assignments because they wanted high grades. I think they didn't really put much effort in gaining knowledge. What they wanted to get was high grades. Of course, they read books. They studied. They made their assignments well, and as a result, they also gained knowledge. But they didn't thirst for knowledge, and that's why the knowledge they got was superficial. It was superficial. They didn't really want knowledge. But as for me, I really wanted knowledge. That's what I wanted. That's what made high school worthwhile for me. So when I reached college, the classroom was really boring to me. Even mathematics became boring to me, because most of my classmates just wanted grades. But as for me, I already did some advanced reading before I entered college. So when I entered college, there was little that I would learn from my teachers, because I already did some advanced knowledge. some advanced reading. And there were times that I skipped some classes. So that I would have time to read novels in the library. There was this one subject that was really boring to me, and I didn't like the teacher because it was boring to me. And I think the teacher was able to see that I was bored in her class, and she didn't like that. So eventually she got angry, and she told me that I should, exert some effort in her class. And I felt bad. I mean, I really wasn't bored, and I was finding it very difficult to motivate myself to participate in the activities in the class. Most of them were pointless to me because I think the activities we did were very helpful to my classmates because they found it interesting, so they were learning something. But as for me, I just thought that things were very inefficient, so I was really not interested in many of my classes when I was in college. Of course, there were some classes that I enjoyed, so I began skipping classes so that I would read a book in the library, any book that I found interesting then. But before I reached college, I became fluent in speaking the English language already, and I would say for the most part I taught myself how to speak English. I didn't want to study English, but I was very interested in English novels, English stories, English movies, and as a result, I learned English in the process. My purpose in reading English books or reading English novels and English stories was to gain knowledge, was to know some things about things that I'm interested in, and as a result, I learned English as well. So that's how I studied English, or that's how I learned English. My father is an English teacher, but he never really tried to teach me English. What he did was he bought comics and storybooks when my brothers and I were children, and he bought those because he saw that we were interested in it. He wanted to give us his love of reading. So my father loves to read. And I think he bought storybooks and comics so that we would also love to read. I think it worked. I mean, for me, maybe, I think it worked. I got my love of reading from my father. When it comes to speaking, of course, I didn't have English-speaking friends. I didn't have English-speaking friends that I would talk to every day. You can also learn English that way, but I didn't have English-speaking friends whom I can speak English with every day. So for the speaking part, There were there were some English classes that I had in college, like phonetics, and I did learn some things, but classes gave me ideas about what I should study. So things were introduced, some interesting things were introduced when I was in college, but it wasn't really those things like phonetics, for example. Phonetics. Let's take phonetics, for example. Phonetics was introduced when we were in college, but it wasn't really studied very well inside the classroom. So I had to do my studies on my own. I had to study phonetics on my own. Of course, when we were high school and when we were in primary school, especially when I was in primary school, we had speech exercises, which really helped me because they were really basics. Back then, I didn't know anything about the English language. But when I reached college, we did have some speech activities, but I could do those activities on my own. So in the Philippines, once you reach high school, if you want to excel in a certain subject, you have to study on your own if you want to excel in a certain subject. I think we have great teachers. Because they're really patient. They are very understanding. They're very much experienced. They try to share their knowledge to the best of their abilities as they can. But the knowledge they impart is limited by the circumstances in the Philippines. If you want to excel, you have to study on your own, and I think it's the same in every country. A school can help you excel. But you have to. But if you want to really excel, then you have to study on your own. You have to help yourself. And that was for me. I was really interested in world history and literature, and that's what I wanted. That's why I like classic movies, because classic movies portray a lot about the culture of a certain country. It wasn't just English stories. I was also very interested in Japanese anime programs, Japanese movies, Chinese movies, a little bit of Korean stuff, but I didn't really spend a lot of time on Korean things because there were other things that I was preoccupied about. But anyway, that's how I studied English. All right. Maybe some part of it is from Philippine schools. So if you are able to finish primary school in the Philippines, then most likely you can understand basic English, maybe. And if you maybe you can also converse in English, maybe. I'm not sure, but that's what I think. If you finish primary school in the Philippines, you would be able to converse in English. And after that, everything else is up to you. I mean, if you want to study more than basic English, then those things are up to you. Yeah, maybe the only advantage of Filipinos, of what Filipinos have when it comes to studying English compared to Japanese students is that it's very easy to find English books in the Philippines. You just go to the library and you'll find so many English books there. Maybe the big advantage about the big disadvantage of having so much of English stuff is that Filipinos forget to develop their own languages. Filipinos have forgotten to develop their own languages. That's the biggest thing that I don't like about studying English in the Philippines. There's nothing wrong if you study a foreign language, but I would think it would be bad if you replace your own language with a foreign language, because every culture is rich, every language is rich, and that's why Filipinos should also develop and study their own languages. Of course, just my opinion. Anyway, this ends my series of how did I learn English, and let me know what you think of my experience, or if you have questions, if you have comments, then comment on the comment section below or ask questions.